Register for our blog and join the Progressive Army.
Welcome to the Benjamin Dixon Show. I am your host, Benjamin Dixon. Today is Monday, May 25th. It is Memorial Day, 2020. Thanks so much for joining me. The New York Times Sunday paper front page was a list of names. Only the first 1,000 of over are quickly approaching 100,000 people who have died from the coronavirus, and those are just official deaths. We are quickly approaching that threshold of 100,000, and it has not even been 3 months into this pandemic since we began in earnest quarantining, self-quarantining, and social distancing. We have at this point 97,049 deaths across the United States, 1.6 million cases. The backdrop of that, of course, is the fact that we are at a level of, we're desensitized, to put it simply. I don't know that we can actually understand or comprehend the sheer magnitude of how many people have died in the last 2 months, 3 months. There's a movie that I watched, or actually I didn't finish watching it, but I started watching it. And at the very beginning of the movie, the name of the movie is Seven Splinters in Time. At the beginning, it gives a quote that is attributed to Anna Freud, the daughter of Sigmund Freud. And the quote says that repetition is how we master a trauma. I think one way to interpret that is that repetition is how you become desensitized to a trauma. And every day we get new reports of hundreds of people dying. On some days, there are thousands of people dying. On some days, there was one day in particular, we got close to 3,000 people who died in the United States alone from the coronavirus. We are approaching 100,000, and yet we are doing the same thing that we did before we even got the news of this virus in terms of our politics, in terms of our reaction to it, in terms of protecting the people. The government insisting on us reopening, people taking advantage of the bars being open, the beaches being open. The Daytona Beach this weekend was flooded with people. I mean, thousands, tens of thousands of people who packed the beaches for Memorial Day weekend. The clubs here in Atlanta are jumping, and we are getting close to 100,000 people who have died from this pandemic. And we're only at the beginning. The problem is that we are desensitized to everything that's happening around us because of the absurdity of it all. It is quite ridiculous how we are responding to this type of crisis. I do wonder how America responded to the Spanish flu. I do know how they made the second wave worse because they were just so tired of quarantining, of social distancing, that they threw a ticker tape parade at the end of the first wave thinking it was over. And then lo and behold, even more people died in the second wave. But the thing is, like, we haven't even gotten past the first wave yet. And we are increasing the impact of the first wave. I mean, we're not even 3 months in and we're at 100,000 deaths. And yet that was not enough for us to actually do something to stop it or mitigate it beyond what we did as individuals. I mean, people who could quarantine and social distance, self-quarantine, we did. New York actually had an unbelievable weekend when they had fewer than 100 people die from the coronavirus. They were averaging a few hundred. I think some days they had up to over 1,000. The majority of the deaths came from New York City alone. And it was because we did everything that we could as individuals, even against what the state, the government was asking us to do. We flattened the curve as much as we could, but that wasn't good enough for the system. Not enough people died. Not enough people died because then the governors started insisting on people going back out into the pandemic, that they started making the conditions worse. They refused to, the federal government refused to pass the second stimulus. Even in the first stimulus didn't give us enough money for people to stay at home like other nations on the face of this planet. And so I think part of how this country continues to get away with what it gets away with is because it just, we repeat it every single day. Here we go again. We're desensitized to what's happening around us. Therefore, I don't think we can appreciate exactly how grim things are right now. at the pace that we're going, I mean, it is quite possible. I don't want, at the risk of sounding alarmist, at the pace that we're going and the complete rejection of self-quarantine that is currently happening in certain states, I just don't see how this doesn't end in a far more traumatic fashion. I mean, we're looking at 200,000-300,000 people minimum, based on the behaviors that are going on right now that are encouraged by the president of the United States, the behaviors that are encouraged by the governors. I just don't see how this ends any differently than far more traumatic than 100,000. And we have to almost conjure up emotions to actually absorb the impact of that. And I think unfortunately, the only way that we can identify with that is if we put ourselves in their shoes, or God forbid, some of us actually get sick and lose loved ones rather. I think unless it hits close to home, then we aren't really able to feel the magnitude of 100,000 other families dealing with this. Some families losing 2 and 3 people. Some entire families have been wiped out by this. And yet, we haven't changed our behavior. It is the cruelest statement of both human strength as well as human indifference. I do understand the need to steel ourselves to not be emotionally shaken by everything that is happening around us, because so much is happening around us. I get that. And it is a testament to how we can brace ourselves and endure very traumatic times. But that would suggest that we're taking this seriously. This country is not taking this seriously. Not when we are celebrating people going out and partying. Not when we're being encouraged to go out and do these things. Not when the barbershops are opening up, the gyms of all places, like the places where you get to have the most contact with people's droplets from people's bodies. Beauty salons. We're not taking this seriously. And I think the reason we're not taking it seriously is because we just don't take anything seriously anymore. America is not a serious nation. We don't handle things. We just assume that we have enough people and enough wealth to absorb the very worst impact that this thing can give us. And that's a pretty bold assumption. That's a pretty that's a lot of hubris there, to assume that America could just simply absorb 250,000 people dying, 300,000 people dying, 40 million people losing their jobs, getting ready to approach 25% unemployment rate, or at least they're projecting that much before this is all said and done. 1 in 4 Americans not having a job, no ability to pay their bills. We really assume that America makes enough money, generates enough wealth, and has a population big enough to, and here's the caveat, with enough entertainment, with enough movies, with enough music, with enough celebrity gossip, with enough drama to keep us distracted from the sheer terror that is happening around us. And if the entertainment wasn't enough, it required the politicization of this pandemic, turning this pandemic, as our guest last week said, turning it into a culture war. And now that it has effectively been turned into a culture war, that was not last week, that was week before, that was Ryan Cooper from The Week. Now that this has been turned into a culture war, not only do you have people desensitized to it, you have people who are completely rejecting the reality of it. I mean, just listen to this clip from Cynthia Grimm of Bexar County, Texas. She's a Republican chairwoman there. She's completely dismissing the entire coronavirus as a Democratic hoax to attack President Donald Trump. And so take off your mask and love each other.
All of this has been promulgated by the Democrats to undo all the good that President Trump has done for our country, and they are worried. So take off your mask, exercise your constitutional rights, stand up, speak up, and vote Republican. My name is Cynthia Brim, and I'm the chairman for the Republican Party of Bexar County. Thank you.
That was just this past week as we approach 100,000 deaths. And the New York Times attempts to dramatize it by placing all the names they could gather in Sunday's paper. And I think even still, looking at that cover, looking at 100,000 people dead, I don't think it's going to have the effect that the New York Times thinks it would have. Because we have the ability to look at all of the craziness that's happening around us, all of the grief that's happening around us, all of the people dying around us, and just click to the next page, move on to the next tweet, scroll down past the next post until we find something that really gets us angry, something about a celebrity or something ridiculous. We are simultaneously desensitized to things we should care about and overly sensitive about things that are irrelevant.
Go to www.patreon.com/The BPD Show and support The Benjamin Dixon Show.
Let's go. A very special welcome to all of our newest patrons without whom this show is impossible. Welcome aboard James Johnson. Thank you for becoming a patron. Kirk Golson. Thank you for becoming a patron. Vincent Giordino. Thank you for becoming a patron. Matthew McMullen. Thank you for becoming a patron. Jonathan Irwin Frank. Thank you for becoming a patron. Zoran, thank you for becoming a patron. I'm not even going to try to massacre your last name like that. Tyler, thank you for becoming a patron. Wills60, thank you for becoming a patron. Ron, thank you for becoming a patron. Calendrill, I got it. Thank you for becoming a patron. Bitchy Shit Show. I think you just wanted to hear me say that on the show. Thank you for becoming a patron. Ruhan Truscott, thank you for becoming a patron. John Oxford and Zivko Iliev, thank you for becoming a patron. You too can become a part of this prestigious and prodigious patron family by going to patreon.com, twice the show, without any of the ads like you get right here.
Welcome back to The Benjamin Dixon Show. Visit us online at www.thebenjamindixonshow.com.
Welcome back, everybody. Welcome back. Yes, Deceptive Editing. I got this morning. I saw a video and I shared it, subsequently took it down and let everyone know that I had gotten I got by Deceptive Editing this video clip of Joe Biden that made it seem like he was justifying the crack laws that gave mandatory sentencing to people who did crack cocaine versus people who did cocaine. And the video was deceptively edited. If you watched it in its entirety, you will see he was trying to make the opposite of what he was trying to say, opposite point, which was it was wrong. And so I'm only mentioning it now because of one thing. It's pretty easy to lay that claim at Joe Biden. It's not true. It's not accurate. I took it down and did as much of an apology as you're going to get from me in terms of Joe Biden. Now, listen, I'm a big man, literally and figuratively, but I'm only going to care so much because it's not as though Joe Biden's past is not riddled with instances where he acted and enacted policies based on that thinking. And so now it's kind of amazing to see that he has a different position today than he had back when he was enacting those laws. You understand what I'm saying? So I'm not saying that to justify my error this morning. I'm saying that to say he's going to have a really tough road ahead if it comes down to people having to dig and see that, let's say, Trump has deceptively edited something, which they're going to do. It helps if you don't have a past that's riddled with racism like that, that's riddled with racist policies, that's riddled with mandatory sentencing, that's riddled with the 94 crime bill. I'm not trying to make an excuse for me, even though it is a convenient excuse for me. I mean, I call myself out too. It's all good. But that shit's really believable about Joe Biden. It is really believable that he would hold a belief today that he held 20, 30 years ago. I mean, it's not as though he was a young lad back then and still trying to form his political ideas about the world. He was a grown-ass man. That's one thing. But really, I don't even care to talk about that anymore, other than the fact to say that he's going to have a problem. It's going to be very difficult for him going forward, because if deceptive editing matches up with what you believed 30 years ago, then holy shit, man. But that wasn't his fault this morning. That was my fault. Here's what he did do. And I want to play a clip of not Morning Joe. I apologize. What is that? AM Joy. It was something morning. AM Joy and Charlemagne the God, as they discussed what happened on the news show, on his radio show rather, on Friday, where he talked about black people not being black, et cetera, et cetera. Now, mind you, everything that I said was going to happen did happen. They have advertisements about that. They have T-shirts about that. I mean, Republicans they're making a lot of hay out of this. I'm not so much concerned about Republicans doing what they do, because that's what they do, and it should be expected, right? It should be expected and countered, right? It should be countered, because I'm sorry, like, Donald Trump is the white supremacist in chief. Donald Trump is getting a lot of people killed, and that's what makes it so infuriating that we're saddled with a guy like Joe Biden, who not only has a past that lines up with any type of deceptive editing around his racist tropes from the past. I mean, it is what it is, but also because he's making gaffes today, racist gaffes that are opportune for Donald Trump to make so much hay. That's just one side of the equation. I'm not even really interested in talking about that so much, because we know that's what's going to happen. What I'm infuriated over is the fact that what was said to and about the black community from Joe Biden on Friday about us not being black, if we can't tell the difference between him and Donald Trump, and the fact that so many white and non-black liberals are dismissing this as merely just a dumb statement, and if you dare talk about it, they will attack you as though you were a Russian stooge, right? And I want to use that because that's all anybody they disagree with is a Russian. So much so, this is a big setup to say something very simple, so much so that they're now going after Joy-Ann Reid. Joy-Ann Reid for this segment that she had with Charlemagne the God. Listen in.
Do you think there's a risk that not just Joe Biden, but the Democratic Party in general just takes for granted that, well, the black people are with us, so we don't really have to give them anything else. They're going to vote for us regardless. Look, they voted for Joe Biden in overwhelming numbers, 6 in 10 black voters, particularly in southern states. They all voted for Joe Biden. We don't need to offer anything more. Do you worry that that is the attitude that Democrats are taking toward the black community?
I mean, I know that's the attitude, you know. I mean, that's why I don't even care about the words and the lip service, and the apology is cool, but the best apology is actually a black agenda. You know, they got to make some real policy commitments to black people. We got to stop acting like the fact that blacks are overrepresented in America when it comes to welfare, poverty, unemployment, homelessness, drug addiction, crime, coronavirus. Like, that's no accident. Like, the whole function of systemic racism is to marginalize black people. And as the great Dr. Claude Anderson says in the book Powernomics, white society has an out of sight, out of mind attitude about racism, and they don't like to have any discussions of substance about systemic racism. So when you have black people who have the nerve, the audacity, the unmitigated gall to act like citizens and demand something of our vote, it's a problem. It's like you got, whites telling us to stay in our place, and you got black people saying, oh, stop, now is not the time, you're going to get Trump reelected. It has to come to a point where we stop putting the burden on black voters to show up for Democrats and start putting the burden on Democrats to show up for black voters.
Well, speak on that thing, brother. Charlemagne the God. That was so well said. I have to wonder if he had a script in front of him, because I don't even know if I could have said it that well off the top of my head. That joint was exactly the truth. Putting all the meandering aside, that's absolutely the truth. And so many people who they love Joy-Ann Reid when she did all that she could to stop Bernie Sanders. Now they think Joy-Ann Reid is a Bernie bro. See, this is the level of derangement, political derangement that is happening in the mind of liberals who have reduced their entire world to being nothing more than getting rid of Donald Trump. Because if that means, hell, we've seen how far they would go. They went as far as Michael Bloomberg. They went as far as embracing Michael Bloomberg to try to get rid of Donald Trump, when Michael Bloomberg is the same as Donald Trump. And so, this is the problem, though. The problem is that they have no ability to control black people the way they want and need to control. They just really need to be able to tell us to just show up and vote for whoever they want us to vote. Because if black people actually start demanding what we deserve in this country, the Democratic Party would be as problematic to us as the Republican Party is. Do you know how many times I've run into liberals and progressives and people who claim to be progressive who dismiss the fight of black people as much as Republicans do? You can't even have a conversation about racism, systemic racism, and white supremacy without having some white leftists and some white progressives and liberals, rather, and leftists for that matter, roll their eyes and try to find a way to chip the conversation away from systemic racism, as if it's not a thing, as if we aren't. Look at the number of people who are being killed simply because they are black. So it's not just Republicans. And this is what you're missing. This is what they don't want to have the conversation over, because if we have the conversation over it, it fundamentally undermines the Democratic establishment. To have the conversation about the plight of black people in this country, both in terms of racism and economics, and the intersection thereof, fundamentally undermines the agenda of both political parties in this country. You cannot talk about liberation, the liberation of black people, without it stepping on the toes of the Democratic establishment. And so when black people like Joyanne Reid have a black come to Jesus moment and realize that they have to say something or else their blackness really is in question, like you become the step and fetch it for the Democratic Party the way Candace Owens is the step and fetch it for the Republican Party. And because Joyanne Reid said at the end of the day, I know I'm still black, so I got to keep it 100, then what she says or what they explore in the conversation becomes a direct threat to the Democratic establishment. And so, of course, they're going to turn on her just like they turned on the rest of us. The rest of us who were ready to do whatever we had to do to get rid of Donald Trump, except for the fact of what we had to do to get rid of Donald Trump was to do the right thing for working people. That's what we had to do the right thing for marginalized people. And you cannot talk about black people. You cannot talk about marginalized people and working class people without talking about black people. So, of course, don't be surprised whenever what you need for your material well-being steps on the toes of the Democratic establishment if they don't turn around and turn on you too. It's just a matter of time.
I think there are many whites who act friendly toward Negroes. A fox acts friendly toward the lamb. And usually the fox is the one who ends up with the lamb chop on his plate. The wolf doesn't act friendly, and therefore the wolf has more difficulty in getting the lamb chop in his plate. I say that because it is usually if you study the structure of the Negro community, economically, politically, civically, psychologically, and otherwise, it's controlled by the white liberal, who usually poses as the friend of the Negro, who actually differs from the white conservative in the same way that the fox differs from the wolf. Their appetite is the same. Their motives are the same. It's only their mannerisms and methods that differ.
Newsweek is reporting that only 3% of Bernie Sanders supporters have donated to Joe Biden's campaign. And go figure. I'm surprised the percentage is that high. I get it. I get everyone wants to be able to tap into that pool of resources that Bernie Sanders was able to generate, but you have to understand very clearly you can't force people to give you their money. Okay? You can't guilt people. You may be able to guilt people into voting against Donald Trump, but you're not going to be able to guilt people into giving you money. What the hell is wrong with people to actually think that they are entitled to take people's money just because they gave to other campaigns? It is not as though Joe Biden isn't like a complete anathema to most voters that supported Bernie Sanders. You'll be lucky You'll be lucky if you get, what I think was a 20%, somewhere around 25%. No, I'm sorry, that's 25% of Hillary supporters who didn't vote for Barack Obama. And I think last time around it was like 18% of Bernie Sanders. If you get that same kind of result where 18% of Bernie Sanders supporters don't vote for you, then you're actually doing really good. So, I mean, if you put it in perspective, how can you honestly be even surprised remotely when Joe Biden is running a campaign that's completely opposite of what Bernie Sanders fought for? I'm not really shocked that these people are writing articles like this. I'm shocked that they think somewhere in their mind that we have a duty to do for one candidate what we did for another candidate. That is the ultimate sense of entitlement. That's really like saying, and this is what politics has become. This is what establishment politics will always be. This is what capitalism is. This is honestly, if you cut to the core of it, there is an expectation that you will serve the system as it is, economically, politically, socially. In every way imaginable, they have a full expectation that you are going to continue marching to the beat that they set in motion without ever complaining about it. So not only should you be willing to donate to Joe Biden, even though you don't agree with his politics, and you may very well suffer it to be so and go ahead and vote for him to get rid of Donald Trump, that's your prerogative. But not only do they expect you to just guilt vote for him, they expect you to give him money. But not only that, they expect this system for you to be able to survive without making any changes in this pandemic. Go ahead and go to work in this pandemic. By the way, keep consuming at the same level that you've been consuming, because we got to hit our quarterly profit margins. All of this entire system is nothing more than a bunch of elite, entitled, privileged pricks who have an expectation for you to do for them so that they can have the same benefit that you provided someone else. And I think what's finally happening, because it has to happen, the people who have been trapped in this cycle, this system for so long, are taking a look at things and saying, you know what, I just can't continue to operate this way. Not only do I not want to operate this way, but I can't continue to play politics as usual. And that's the number one threat. I think ultimately the refusal to participate in this economic system at the same levels that we've been participating at, because we have to fundamentally change how we do things in order to survive in this new economy, this economy that's emerging from COVID-19. The refusal to participate at the same level is infuriating the elites. The refusal to just give them our vote is infuriating the elites. And now 97% of you have refused to donate to Joe Biden like you donated to Bernie Sanders, and it's infuriating the elites. What does it mean? That means that your ultimate power is your decision whether or not you're going to participate in this system as it is. Whether or not you're going to give them your vote, that's your power. Whether or not you're going to give them your money, that's your power. Whether or not you're going to give them your labor, that's your power. Are you going to continue to consume at the same levels you've been consuming at all this time? That's your prerogative and that's your power. And your refusal to do so completely neutralizes this system's power to it reveals ultimately, let me correct myself. It shows them that they cannot force you to participate. They cannot force you to participate. It is your choice. If you decide that Donald Trump is a unique threat and we got to get rid of him, then you go out and vote and give them your franchise. But if you decide that you refuse to buy anything else more than what you need and you do your own personal consumer strike, that's also your prerogative, and they cannot control you nor compel you. Exercise your autonomy. Be free. You decide for yourself what you're going to do with your time, your vote, your labor, and your money. Patrons, stay tuned. Everyone else, I'll see you tomorrow.
The Benjamin Dixon Show is only possible with listener support. Go to www.patreon.com/The BPD Show and support The Benjamin Dixon Show. If you like this episode, be sure to share, like, and subscribe.